The air in the penthouse was supposed to smell like lilies and the promise of forever, but instead it smelled like betrayal and the metallic taste of a devastating realization. I knew my fiancé was a criminal when I found the hidden ledger, but I never expected the wedding wasn't the prize. It was the deadline. The air in the penthouse suite still smelled faintly of expensive lilies and champagne. Tomorrow, Anya and I were supposed to be legally bound. Today, we were celebrating the final hours of our singledom in a suite overlooking the glittering skyline of the city, a view that symbolized everything we'd built together: stability, success, a future so meticulously planned it felt like reading a perfectly proofread novel. I traced the intricate lace of the veil draped over the chaise lounge, feeling a giddy, almost unbearable happiness. 10 years of dating, 3 years of engagement, and finally, the launch of our life. Anya had stepped out an hour ago. "Just running down to the lobby," she'd chirped, smoothing the emerald silk of her dress. "The florist needs final confirmation on the centerpieces for the reception. Don't move, darling, or you'll smudge the view." I'd laughed, pouring myself another celebratory glass of sparkling cider. I was driving us straight to the private airfield at dawn. I wandered into the dressing room, admiring the suit laid out for tomorrow. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. As I reached for my cufflinks resting on the mahogany valet stand, my elbow nudged a leather-bound day planner tucked underneath the spare set of dress shoes. It wasn't Anya's usual designer agenda. This was heavy, utilitarian, the kind a serious businessman might carry. I hesitated. Invasion of privacy? Absolutely. But curiosity, once pricked, festers quickly. I flipped it open. The first few pages were typical: meeting reminders, stock summaries. Then, around the date 3 months ago, the entries changed. They became coded, harsh, filled with abbreviations I didn't recognize. DL payment due, asset recovery priority beta, and several pages filled entirely with numbers that looked less like bank codes and more like ledger entries for something illicit. My stomach tightened, the champagne suddenly tasting like metal. This wasn't about spreadsheets. I dug deeper, skimming pages that felt increasingly alien to the man I thought I knew, the man who swore off risk after his first failed startup attempt 5 years ago. Then I found the section marked simply with a scratched-out capital X. It was a series of short, handwritten notes, dated sporadically over the last year. "Don't push me, Dee. The timeline is non-negotiable. We want the full recovery by the end of the fiscal quarter. Remember what happens when payments lapse." My hands were shaking so badly I had to lean against the wall. David. That was my fiancé's name. David was a financial analyst, respectable, if a little overly cautious since that early business setback. He never spoke of pressure, only steady growth. Who was Dee, and what recovery? I flipped to the most recent entry, dated just 2 days ago, the handwriting cramped and desperate. Almost there. The final transfer is set for Monday morning, right after the paperwork. I promise, this debt is wiped clean. I just need 48 more hours of quiet. Debt. What debt could possibly be so terrifying that he'd hide it from the woman he was marrying tomorrow, the woman whose entire family wealth he was about to merge with through this union? I kept turning pages, searching for context, for an explanation that would make this a misunderstanding, a complex investment deal gone sour. Instead, I found a loose sheet of paper tucked deep into the planner's spine pocket. It wasn't handwritten. It was a clean, typewritten photocopy of a receipt. It was a receipt for an extraordinary amount of cash withdrawal, enough to sink a small country, with a footnote scribbled in the margin. For the settlement, see Handler M for final instructions regarding the relocation package. If the marriage goes through, the arrangement is voided. If the marriage is postponed, default terms apply. My breath hitched. Relocation package? Voided if the marriage went through? Why would a wedding void a relocation package? Unless the wedding wasn't the destination. It was the deadline. My eyes darted back to the day planner, looking for any mention of Handler M. There was nothing specific, just another cryptic note on the last page. Check the secure drive. The contingency plan is locked under the anniversary date, November 12th. The anniversary date. That was today, November 12th, the night before our wedding. I frantically searched the room for a portable hard drive, something small and discreet that David always kept for work emergencies. I knew he kept one. I found it tucked into the lining of his unused travel bag, tucked beneath his emergency passport copies. It was a small, black, military-grade drive, cold to the touch. The planner had provided the password, 11/12. My heart hammered against my ribs with such force I thought the sound would carry through the soundproofed walls. I plugged the drive into my personal laptop, praying David hadn't installed any sophisticated tracking software. The login window popped up. I entered 11/12. Access granted. The drive was organized into cryptic folders, leverage, assets, and one labeled ominously, exit strategy. I clicked on exit strategy. Inside there was only one file, a PDF named Final Disposition. I clicked it open. It wasn't a financial document. It was a security clearance document, heavily watermarked, and the picture staring back at me wasn't David. It was a much younger man, but the eyes, those cold, watchful eyes, were undeniably his. The name listed above the photo wasn't David Sterling. It was Elias Volkov. Underneath the picture, the profile summary detailed a history that made my blood run icy. Not a failed startup, a history of infiltration, corporate espionage, and, chillingly, the mention of a highly specialized disposal unit linked to a shadowy international network dealing in high-level industrial secrets and the extraction of powerful assets. They specialized in dissolving identities. Then I saw the last line of the document, highlighted in stark red digital ink. Subject is under observation pending extraction protocol completion. If subject successfully integrates into target family structure, the Hayes dynasty, subject is to assume identity permanently and provide data stream until termination criteria are met. If integration fails, immediate extraction required, target assets seized, and subject neutralized to prevent compromise. Neutralized. The wedding wasn't the start of our life. It was the final lock on a cage he was building for me. He wasn't marrying me for love. He was marrying me to gain control of my family's international technology firm, using me as the ultimate Trojan horse. And if I backed out now, if I alerted anyone, the network would seize everything, and Elias Volkov, my fiancé David, would be neutralized for failing his mission. Or worse, I would be neutralized for interfering. Just as the realization slammed into me that the man I loved was a highly trained operative sent to steal my future, my phone vibrated on the counter. It was a text from Anya. "Be right up, darling. Just confirming one last thing with the concierge." My eyes flew to the door. The elevator chime echoed down the hallway, a sharp, metallic sound slicing through the silence of the suite. Someone was coming. It wasn't Anya. The concierge always announced themselves. This was the sound of someone arriving at the prearranged time, the time when David, Elias, was supposed to secure the final pieces of leverage. I ripped the drive out of the laptop, shoved the planner back under the shoes, and scrambled to turn off the screen. I had mere seconds. I glanced wildly around the room, my mind screaming. If they found the drive, if they found me here looking at it, I was finished. I heard footsteps approaching the outer door. Not the familiar hurried step of Anya, but two sets of heavy, synchronized boots approaching the lock. They were early. The 48 hours of quiet were over. The sound of the approaching footsteps wasn't the nervous shuffle of a late delivery or the eager approach of my bride-to-be. It was measured, professional, and there were definitely two distinct sets of footsteps echoing in the marble corridor outside the main door. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't coming for David/Elias. They were coming for the contingency plan, the contents of that drive. And they were here early because the integration had failed, or because someone higher up decided to cut out the middleman before the wedding could officially seal the deal. I shoved the laptop under the bed linens, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The security drive, the proof of Elias's entire fabricated existence, was still clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles were white. Where could I hide it? There was no time to run, no time to formulate a plausible explanation for why I was standing in the dimly lit dressing room looking like a deer caught in headlights. The door handle began to turn, slow and deliberate. I made a split-second decision based purely on panic and instinct, honed by years of watching espionage thrillers with David. God, the irony was nauseating. The dressing room was equipped with a floor-to-ceiling mirrored wardrobe, the kind rich people use to feel like movie stars. I ripped the door open and dove inside, pulling the mirrored door shut just as the main suite door clicked open with a soft, almost polite snick. I held my breath, pressing my back against the silk garments hanging around me. The air inside the wardrobe was stale, smelling of expensive mothballs, and David's sharp, unfamiliar cologne. "Check the periphery first," a low voice commanded in heavily accented English. It wasn't David's voice. It was cold, authoritative, and completely unknown to me. "Understood. Handler M requested full sweep. If the primary asset is here, we secure the hard copy immediately." The second voice was younger, perhaps more nervous. I could hear them moving through the main living area, the soft scuffing of expensive leather soles on the thick Persian rug. They weren't crashing through. They were methodical, sweeping the room. They knew precisely what they were looking for. They knew that the contingency plan, the documentation proving Elias's duplicity and the threat of neutralization, was in this room. "No sign of Sterling," the first voice noted. "Did Anya secure him earlier?" Anya. They knew Anya. The realization sent a fresh spike of terror through me. Was Anya part of this? Was her frantic dash to the florist a signal? Had she been monitoring me, waiting for me to find the proof so she could ensure its immediate retrieval before I could use it? "Her comms went dead 5 minutes ago," Handler M confirmed. "She's either secured the asset or she's been compromised herself. We proceed as if Sterling is attempting extraction." My stomach plummeted. Anya was either the accomplice or the victim. Either way, I was trapped between two factions of dangerous strangers, standing amidst silk gowns and Elias's, expensive Italian suits. I heard the distinct sound of a drawer being forcefully yanked open, followed by a curse. They were tearing the room apart, but they hadn't checked the dressing room yet. My eyes darted to the small gap between the mirrored door and the frame. I could see the shadow of the man, Handler M, standing near the entrance to the dressing area, peering in. He didn't open the door. He simply held up a small electronic device. It beeped softly, a rhythmic pulse. It was scanning. A thermal signature detector, perhaps? The silk garments, the trapped air, it might give me away. I remembered a trick from a survival seminar David had insisted we attend. Something about minimizing ambient heat signature. Without thinking, I ripped off the heavy silk slip dress I was wearing and threw it over myself, a thin, useless shroud. I pulled the silk gown from the hanger next to me, draping it over my head as well, trying to break up any discernible human shape against the background radiation of the room. The beeping continued, unwavering. They knew someone was in here. Suddenly, the floor beneath the wardrobe shuddered slightly, not from movement but from a vibration coming through the floor, a heavy door slamming shut somewhere below us. "Handler M, report. What was that?" the younger agent snapped over the internal comms. "Hold position," Handler M barked back, his voice tight. "We have secondary interference. Internal network alert. We have unexpected system lockdown on level 53. Someone just locked down the building grid." I risked a slight shift in position, peering out again. Handler M was distracted, his gaze fixed on the electronic device, his brow furrowed in frustration. The lockdown meant they couldn't communicate effectively, and more importantly, it meant security. My security, the hotel's security, was about to arrive. But would they arrive in time to save me, or would Elias's people have their own planted personnel in the building management? The pause stretched into an eternity. The beeping device pulsed, insistent. I felt the metallic press of the hard drive digging into my palm. Then, the main door to the dressing room was wrenched open, not gently, but with enough force to rattle the entire frame. Handler M hadn't bothered with the handle. He had kicked it open. He stared directly into the darkness of the wardrobe. His eyes narrowed. The light from the suite caught the dull reflection of the mirrored door, illuminating the vague, dark shape I had created with the draped silk. "Come out, Asset 2, Handler M hissed, pulling a dark object from his jacket, an item that looked horrifyingly like the illegal weapon I dreaded finding in David's things. "Don't make this complicated. We need the drive." I had to move. I couldn't stay hidden, not with him that close. In a desperate surge, I lunged sideways, not toward the main suite, but toward the back wall of the wardrobe, where the back panel met the outer shell of the building. I slammed my shoulder into the thin paneling with all my remaining strength, aiming for the soundproofing material. The thin plywood buckled inward with a sickening crunch. I didn't feel the splintering wood. I only felt the sudden, terrifying rush of cold, high-altitude air hitting my face. I hadn't hit the interior wall. I had hit the exterior service paneling, separating the wardrobe from the maintenance catwalk that ran along the sheer face of the skyscraper. The gap was just large enough. I squeezed through the ragged hole, pulling the hard drive with me, just as Handler M yelled and fired. I heard the whistling sound of a projectile impacting the wooden hangers inches from my head. I scrambled onto the narrow metal grate of the catwalk, the city lights spinning sickeningly far below me. I was outside, on the 50th floor. With the wind tearing at my thin silk cover and the sound of the two heavily armed men starting to follow me through the broken hole in the wall behind me. "She's exposed. Containment breach on the exterior. Do not let her reach the roof access," Handler M bellowed, his voice instantly swallowed by the roar of the wind and the distant city traffic. I looked up. Above me, the dark, imposing bulk of the roof access door looked impossibly far away, and I knew that if I didn't reach it before Elias, before Volkov, or his network, I wouldn't just lose my company, I would simply cease to exist. The wind on the catwalk was a physical entity trying to rip me from the narrow metal grate where I was crouched. Below, the world was a dizzying tapestry of light, miles away from the safe, solid ground I had taken for granted just an hour ago. My bare feet slipped on the slick metal as I forced myself to crawl toward the only vertical escape route, the access ladder leading to the roof. The sound of movement behind me was terrifyingly quick. They weren't hesitating. Handler M had clearly decided that protocol was secondary to securing the drive. "Stop right there," the younger operative shouted, his voice thin against the gale. I saw the silhouette of his weapon raised against the pale ambient light reflecting off the building facade. I scrambled faster, the sharp edges of the grate tearing into my skin. The drive, that tiny, crucial piece of evidence detailing my fiancé's betrayal and the threat against my life, was still clenched in my fist. I reached the base of the ladder. It was bolted securely to the concrete structure, separating the exterior maintenance zone from the final penthouse-level roof garden. I grabbed the cold metal rungs and began to ascend, ignoring the burning in my arms. I had to get to the roof, find a secure comms point, and contact someone, anyone who wasn't connected to David's intricate web. As I hauled myself onto the first few rungs, the sound of the first shot cracked through the night air. It wasn't aimed at me. It struck the metal grate I had just vacated with a deafening ping that sent sparks flying. They were testing their aim, establishing dominance. "She's climbing. Go high. I'll cover the fire escape path," Handler M directed, his voice now tinged with professional urgency. He knew if I got to the roof, I might be able to signal an external party, bypassing the internal lockdown Elias's network had established. The ascent was brutal. Every rung was a victory against the encroaching terror. I risked a glance down. Handler M was climbing the ladder rapidly, surprisingly agile for a man of his apparent seniority. The younger agent, however, seemed to be taking the alternative route, the small, precarious path leading toward what I vaguely recognized as the building's emergency fire chute access hatch. I pulled myself onto the flat expanse of the roof garden. It was manicured and eerily silent up here, a strange oasis hundreds of feet in the air. To my left was the main structure housing the mechanical systems. To my right, the glass-enclosed conservatory, where we were supposed to have a private champagne toast at dawn. The only way off was the service elevator, which would be locked down, or the main stairwell, which was almost certainly guarded or compromised. I spotted the emergency satellite phone box mounted near the perimeter wall, the one reserved for genuine, catastrophic building failures. It was my only shot at contacting the outside world without using the cellular network they were undoubtedly monitoring. I sprinted toward it, the silk barely protecting me from the biting cold. I reached the metal housing, my hands fumbling for the latch. Click. The latch opened easily. They hadn't expected me to reach this far, this fast. Inside, nestled against the old-fashioned handset, was a small, sleek device, a modern satellite communication unit, clearly installed recently. And beside it, a single white envelope, pristine against the gray metal casing. My fingers trembled as I reached for the envelope. It wasn't sealed with wax. It was secured with a small, elegant silver tie. The tie clip I had given David/Elias for his birthday, the one he always wore with his formal suits. Inside the envelope was a single, professionally printed card. Not a threat, not a demand for the drive. It was a reservation confirmation for a private jet scheduled to depart from a remote airfield outside the city limits at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. The destination, a non-extradition island nation, prepaid for 10 years. The passenger list, Elias Volkov and Anya Sterling. The air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. Anya hadn't been compromised. She hadn't been trying to stop me. She had been securing her own escape route, confirming her exit strategy with the network, and using me, my wedding, my family's stability, as the final distraction to ensure Elias/Volkov walked free, debt cleared, with his true partner in tow. I spun around, the card fluttering from my nerveless fingers. I looked across the roof garden toward the conservatory, the glass structure shimmering under the moon. And there, standing calmly by the glass doors, silhouetted against the soft interior lighting of the penthouse balcony, was David, or Elias. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo. He was dressed in dark tactical gear, his face grim and unreadable. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding something much worse. A remote control, small and black, pointed directly at the central climate control unit on the roof. "I knew you'd find the contingency plan," Elias said, his voice now amplified, calm and perfectly level, booming across the roof thanks to some hidden speaker system. "You were always too inquisitive, my love, but you missed the most crucial detail, the one Anya secured for us." He flicked a switch on the remote. A low, ominous humming started vibrating through the roof structure, and the air immediately grew hot, almost unbearable. "The network won't neutralize me now, darling, because I'm not leaving. I'm staying right here, where the data is. You see, that drive you're holding? It's the bait. The real extraction target was never the documents. It was the physical access to your family's server core, located directly beneath this garden. And when the heat escalates to critical levels in the next 90 seconds, the fire suppression system will dump industrial-grade coolant directly onto the core to save it." He paused, letting the inferno-like heat wash over us. "And guess who will be right here, trying to reach that satellite phone, looking like a desperate intruder caught trying to sabotage the building's infrastructure right before a catastrophic system failure? You. You get the massive life sentence for the attempted corporate sabotage. I walk away clean, with Anya, leaving the mess for the Hayes dynasty to clean up. Welcome to the wedding night, my dear. Enjoy the sauna. The heat radiating from the HVAC unit beside me was suddenly intense, blistering the exposed skin on my arms. The air in the small oasis was thickening, becoming heavy and difficult to draw into my lungs. 90 seconds. That was the countdown before this beautiful rooftop turned into my execution chamber, disguised as a tragic accident caused by a panicked intruder. Me. Elias, Volkov, stood perfectly still by the glass door, the remote control looking less like a piece of electronics and more like the scepter of a false king. He was savoring this moment, the predictable conclusion to his elaborate setup. My mind raced, desperately trying to process the sheer depth of the manipulation. Anya hadn't just betrayed me. She had been the co-pilot on this flight to my ruin. The reservation wasn't for escape. It was the final assurance that I would be framed for destroying the very company I was supposed to inherit. I gripped the satellite phone handset, realizing its purpose had instantly shifted. It wasn't for calling the authorities. It was for calling the one person I could still trust, no matter how unlikely the scenario sounded. Elias, I choked out, fighting the suffocating heat. You think you have me contained. You think you've won. He chuckled, a dry, grating sound that seemed entirely unsuited to the man I thought I knew. I have already won. The extraction team is en route to secure the server room from the bottom up. In 3 minutes, the fire suppression will flood the core, wiping all internal data logs proving my existence, and leaving you standing here, drenched in sweat, holding the evidence of your own malice. You forgot one thing about me, Elias, I managed, forcing myself to stand tall despite the dizziness threatening to overwhelm me. My father didn't just build the company, he built the redundancies. He always said, if a system fails, look for the physical override that bypasses the digital control. I slammed the satellite handset down, ignoring the frantic blinking indicator lights. The remote control in Elias's hand was tied to the digital sequence. If I could disrupt the physical relay powering the HVAC unit, the unit generating this suffocating heat, I might stall the coolant dump long enough. I looked past Elias, toward the service access door leading to the main stairwell, the door I had been too afraid to approach moments ago. That door was the physical nexus for the building's entire utilities system on this floor. The building grid is locked down, remember? Elias taunted, noticing my gaze shifting. No access. You are trapped on this rooftop with the rising temperature. You locked down the network, I countered, taking a staggered step toward the service door, trying to appear as though I was making a desperate, last-ditch run for the elevator. But you didn't account for the physical bypass my father installed after the '08 scare. Elias smirked, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his eyes. He knew my father's obsessive security protocols better than anyone. He'd been analyzing them for years. Don't be a fool. That door requires a biometric keycard keyed to the CEO. Good thing I'm wearing mine, I shot back, patting my neck. I had discreetly slipped the thin, embedded security chip necklace my father had given me years ago, the one Elias always mocked as outdated, beneath my makeshift silk shroud. It was the only key that mattered. As I moved toward the door, Elias suddenly lunged, ditching the remote and sprinting toward me, realizing I wasn't bluffing. He moved with terrifying speed, his tactical gear cutting through the heat with predatory grace. "No, that's the final trigger," he roared. I reached the doorframe just as he closed the distance between us. Instead of scanning my card, I used the momentum of his charge against him. I swung the door open wide, pivoting violently so that the heavy metal slab became an instantaneous shield. Elias slammed directly into the door, the impact sending a violent shockwave through my arm, but the door held. He recoiled, stumbling back onto the roof garden. I slammed my security card against the reader. Beep! Access granted. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing the dark, unlit stairwell beyond. I threw myself through the opening, my eyes stinging from the heat, and slammed the manual emergency deadbolt from the inside. The mechanism locked with a satisfying, heavy thunk. I was safe from Elias, but I was deep inside a locked, unpowered stairwell that plummeted 50 stories, and the heat outside was rapidly approaching critical mass. I could hear Elias slamming against the door behind me, the tactical boots pounding uselessly against the steel. "You think a bolted door stops me?" his voice echoed, muffled but furious. "The coolant dump is automatic. You bought yourself 30 seconds, maybe less, before this entire section of the building fries its own wiring." I scrambled down the first few steps into the pitch blackness, pulling the silver tie clip from my pocket, the one Elias had used to seal Anya's reservation notice. It was intricate, almost decorative, and as I ran my thumb over its surface in the dark, I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible seam along the side. It wasn't just a tie clip. It was a specialized data key, the physical emergency override that my father had hidden within the most innocuous item he could think of. It was the key to the internal network reset, the master switch that could halt the coolant sequence, provided I could find a physical port to plug it into before the ceiling started melting. I took the next flight of stairs 2 at a time, plunging into absolute darkness, when suddenly a faint, high-pitched whine echoed up the stairwell from far below. It wasn't the sound of the coolant. It was the distinctive, high-frequency noise of a specialized drilling rig activating, the sound of the network extraction team beginning their ascent from the basement levels toward the server core. They weren't waiting for the fire to purge the data. They were going in to manually secure it now, while I was trapped upstairs, and while Elias was distracted downstairs. The roof fire was the diversion to eliminate me. The drill was the real operation. I reached the landing for the 45th floor, my heart hammering a desperate plea. The door to the hallway was open a crack, letting in a sliver of emergency lighting. And standing directly in that sliver of light, leaning casually against the wall, patiently waiting for me to descend into the kill zone, was Anya. She wasn't wearing her emerald dress anymore. She was dressed in sleek, dark clothing, and she held a silenced, heavy-caliber pistol aimed directly at my chest. "Drop the drive, darling," she said, her voice entirely devoid of the warmth I remembered. "You're too sentimental for this business. Elias needs that key." Anya stood framed in the emergency light, the pistol steady in her hand, her expression one of cold, professional finality. The heat from the rooftop above felt like a distant, forgotten nightmare compared to the icy dread pooling in my gut right now. Anya, my fiancé, my supposed best friend. The betrayal was complete, sharper and more debilitating than Elias's calculated espionage. "Drop the drive, darling," she repeated, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete stairwell. "Elias needs that key." My mind, running on pure adrenaline and the accumulated shock of the last hour, clicked into a terrifying clarity. Elias upstairs was the spectacle, the noise, the heat bomb, designed to frame me and divert attention. Anya down here was the cleaner, waiting at the choke point to ensure the key never reached a functional terminal. They had orchestrated this perfectly. The fall guy on the roof, the cleaner in the stairwell, and the extraction team drilling into the core below. I still clutched the tie clip, the master override, in my right hand, and the hard drive with Elias's true identity in my left. "You know, Anya," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my knees, "for someone who claimed to love the stability of forever, you're awfully eager to burn down the entire building." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. She hadn't expected dialogue. She expected immediate compliance. "Sentiment is a weakness, just like you thought you could fight an organized network with flimsy paper trails. Hand it over." I took a slow step backward, moving deeper into the shadow of the landing. "You're right. Sentiment is weak. But you two fundamentally misunderstood the one thing my father built that Elias could never crack: trust." I raised the hard drive in my left hand. "This drive has Volkov's file. It exposes the whole operation, the network, and the planned neutralization of Elias if he failed the extraction. You told him you secured his exit, but you didn't, did you? You arranged for him to get framed for sabotage while you and your extraction team clean up the data and take over the assets. Anya's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened fractionally. You read the file. That wasn't supposed to happen until after I was incinerated on the roof, I finished for her. You were going to let him take the fall to secure your position with the higher-ups. The reservation wasn't for both of you, was it? It was for one winner. In that split second of hesitation, as Anya processed the fact that I knew her double-cross, I made my move. I didn't drop the drive. I hurled it with every ounce of force I possessed, not at Anya, but at the heavy concrete wall just past her shoulder. The small metallic thud as the drive struck the wall was instantly drowned out by a new piercing sound, a high-pitched electronic shriek coming from the stairwell below, right where the drill teams were operating. What was that? Anya hissed, momentarily distracted, glancing down the shaft. That, I said, taking the opportunity to lunge forward, not toward her weapon, but toward the security panel she was leaning against, is the sound of the master override initializing. As she brought the pistol up, aiming again, I slammed the silver tie clip into the panel's emergency maintenance port, the one I knew existed because Elias had obsessed over it in his research notes. The clip seated perfectly. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for Volkov's plan. The high-pitched whine from below cut off abruptly. The emergency lights in the stairwell flickered once, twice, and then blazed back to full power, overriding the system lockdown. Simultaneously, the oppressive heat radiating from the rooftop access door above vanished, the HVAC unit above stalling mid-cycle. Anya stared at the panel, her face a mask of horror. You fool! You reset the entire utility grid. The system integrity protocol's just activated. My father's favorite protocol, I confirmed, stepping back from the panel. When a critical system is manually interrupted, it flags an immediate, non-negotiable internal audit, overriding any rogue digital commands. The extraction teams below will be locked down by internal security right now, flagged as unauthorized breach attempts. Before Anya could recover, a new sound echoed up the shaft. Not the sound of specialized drills, but the rhythmic, unmistakable, and authorized marching of uniformed security officers. They weren't Volkov's network thugs. They were the building's internal response team, alerted by the system-wide override signal sent by the master key. Anya cursed viciously, realizing she was trapped between compromised external operatives above and legitimate lockdown-enforcing security below. She pivoted, her professional training kicking in, and scrambled toward the nearest exit door on the 45th floor, abandoning the confrontation to escape the impending official investigation. I didn't pursue her. I simply leaned against the newly illuminated wall, gasping for breath, the adrenaline receding to leave behind a crushing exhaustion. The extraction team was contained. Elias was likely still raging on a hot roof, facing a very annoyed building manager about his impromptu sauna session, now without the leverage of the drive, which lay harmlessly against a concrete wall. Minutes later, the first security captain reached the 47th floor landing. He found me there, shaking, dressed in tattered silk, standing beside a freshly triggered master security port. "Ma'am, are you injured? We've had multiple system failures and unauthorized breaches reported on the upper floors." I looked down the stairwell, then back toward the shimmering, newly restored lights of the building. "Tell your teams," I managed, my voice raw, "that the wedding is canceled. And tell them to bring me my phone. I have a few very large, very criminal accounts to freeze." The life I thought I was starting tomorrow was over. But the life I was taking back, the one built on hard work and real trust, was just beginning. I had survived the trap, not by fighting fire with fire, but by finding the single, hidden blueprint that proved the entire structure was built on lies.